I have claimed the 6th highest pit clear in the game for the Necromancer at the time of recording by using a completely new build that abuses obscure game mechanics that no other build in the game has ever used before. This build is dealing over 200 billion damage a second with a range that will one-shot everything on your screen instantly. Unmaker is one of the craziest items ever added to this game, and this build taps into one of the strongest game mechanics in Diablo and abuses it to its fullest. In this guide, I will walk you through exactly how to build it and how to use these broken game mechanics to your advantage. I'm Sor Chaining from Goblin-Inc, and this is Unmaker. So let's quickly discuss what this game mechanic we call snapshotting is and why it's so broken. That way, the gear choices coming up will make more sense. So snapshotting allows you to extend certain buffs to your character for the entire duration of a channeled ability, even after those buffs expire. So in this case, we're looking to stack a lot of very specific buffs to our Soul Rift and activate it in a very certain way so all the buffs that are active when you cast Soul Rift both extend through its entire duration, but also give those buffs to your Unmaker. I will be going over this entire process in more detail in the mechanics section, so it's incredibly important that you do not miss it. But with that explanation out of the way, let's get into the gear. So let's first talk about Unmaker. So Unmaker states that every time you gain 30 essence, you'll do a burst of damage while Soul Rift is active. So the entire idea is we want to spend all of our essence with Bone Spirit, which is a Macabre skill, and then gain that essence back through these casting a Macabre skill grants essence tempers on our rings, as well as stacking a bunch of resource generation in our boots, our chest, and our helmet. The result is we'll be able to instantly spend all of our essence and then immediately gain all of that essence back, which will activate Unmaker multiple times in a single cast. But you'll notice I'm overpowering with it, and that's where snapshotting comes in. So you'll see I'm using the Zon rune word, which states that your next skill cast will be guaranteed to critically strike and overpower. So the entire combo is we'll set up this on our Soul Rift, and because our Soul Rift is guaranteed to crit and overpower, it makes our Unmaker every single time it procs crit and overpower, and it will carry this buff through the entire duration of your Soul Rift. But the craziest part is, this isn't the only buff we're going to be able to snapshot. In our weapon, we have Untimely Death with the Quack's rune word. Both of these buffs are two buffs that are also able to be snapshot for a 100% multiplier and a 140% multiplier. Stacking these three buffs simultaneously and then getting your Soul Rift to snapshot all three of them makes the core playstyle of the build. And what makes this build go from a medium amount of damage to an explosive amount of damage. So being able to set these three up consistently is what's going to make this build be broken. And I go into full detail about how to do that later in the video, so make sure you're watching. As for our other buffs, we're running Conceited on the gloves, and then we're running Sacrificial in the amulet. Now, you'll notice in my gloves, I have Bone Critical Strike chance. In my 2H, I have more Bone Critical Strike chance. In my rings, I have even more Bone Critical Strike chance. Why is that? Well, that's because our enhanced Bone Spirit in our skill tree, every time that we critically strike, we reduce the cooldown of Bone Spirit by 7 seconds. So we really want to crit with this. And because our Unmaker is snapshotting 100% critical strike chance, we don't really need to build crit rate specifically for our Unmaker. So this allows us to temper for Bone Critical Strike chance instead, which means we don't have to roll crit rate in any of our gear, which means we get to run a lot of max life, intelligence, and attack speed instead. Now, another really important thing that I want to point out is this Bone Spirit cooldown reduction temper. I double Masterwork hit mine on a high roll, and that got me enough cooldown reduction in the build to where I didn't need to roll cooldown reduction in the amulet as an affix, and I could pick up intelligence instead. However, for most people, I would really recommend having cooldown reduction in your amulet and having this Bone Spirit cooldown reduction temper. Both of these combined will get you to where you need to be cooldown reduction wise without needing specific masterworks or a specific roll of the temper. However, something I don't recommend getting rid of is this maximum resource GA affix in the amulet. This is important because when you combine it with the maximum resource elixir as well as the maximum resource that we get in our Paragon, it gives us enough maximum essence so that way we're proccing 7 Unmaker procs of Bone Spirit instead of 6. This makes GA maximum resource the highest damage gain you can get out of any affix in your amulet, and it's something I would prioritize over everything else to be able to pick up a good amulet for this build. So if you're serious about wanting to build this, keep an eye out for these GA maximum resource amulets. After that, because we are a overpowered build, we're obviously running Blood Moon Breaches, and Yen's Blessing is something that I want to talk about. So because this build is trying to hit 210 essence generation every single cast, these Macabre Grants essence tempers on top of the essence generation that we have in our helmet and our chest don't quite get us there. So the way I've solved this is through the use of Yen's Blessing, because Yen's Blessing gives us a lot of stats that we want, and it also gives us essence generation, which is what's going to help us get us to that 210 breakpoint. Now, there's another way to do the 210 breakpoint, kind of. So if you have very good boots like this, you can actually put these on and then make your third stat in your 2H Lucky Hit chance to grant essence. In AoE, because Lucky Hit is procced off of Unmaker, oddly enough, it means that Lucky Hit chance to increase essence can take you from that 6 breakpoint to 7 in AoE. The problem is you're going to not be able to do it against a boss. But if you do have good boots like this, I think it is worth dropping the extra proc against a boss majority of the time in order to pick up better boots, and that's probably going to do more for you. In all of the gameplay clips that I showed though, I am using Yen's Blessing. So Yen's Blessing decreases the amount of gear requirement to get this build online. You don't need the triple crit here, you don't need it like any hits here. I would still recommend getting a resource generation GA and then try to masterwork it twice. But you don't even need resource generation to be GA'd here. If you're short on it, you can just masterwork it. So Yen's Blessing is definitely the easiest version of this build to get online, and it's the one that I wanted to showcase the most in this build because it's what majority of people are probably going to be using, and you can see from the results of this video, it is extremely good. Do not sleep on how good Yen's Blessing are for this build. It's going to do a lot for you in order to get the build working. In the skill tree, you're running 2 points into Reap to move down the tree, 3 points in Unliving Energy. Now, if you're unlucky like me and your last masterwork hit the maximum resource, you don't actually need 3, you can go 2. But ideally, you would just like to run this extra point and not have to masterwork it. We're running 3 points of Hued Flesh for the corpse generation, Blight for the damage modifier, Blood Mist, Necrotic Fortitude, which is amazing to help keep us alive, Titan's Fall because it's a gigantic damage modifier, and then 1 point into Spiked Armor. Now, this 1 point is what gets us to armor cap. If you need more armor, you can run more points into this. If you need less, you don't have to run points into this. You just really want to put as many points into this as you need to hit the armor cap. Moving on from that, we're running Death's Embrace, Amplified Damage, and then we're running Abhorrent Decrepify. Moving on from that, we're running Corpse Tendrils all the way up to the Blood Orb. Now, the Blood Orb is going to be very important for 2 reasons. One, it's going to be one of the best ways to stack our Untimely Death through a dungeon, but it also stacks Blood Begets Blood, and because our Soul Rift is applying Vulnerable, we don't really need this upgrade, so this just gives us a lot of value for the build. After that, we're running Necrotic Carapace for our Titan's Fall, and then we're taking 1 point into Bone Spirit, 1 point into Enhanced Bone Spirit, and then 1 point into Ghastly Bone Spirit for the 10% critical strike chance, which is going to help our crit rate requirements by a lot. Speaking of crit rate requirements, I'm only running 2 points into Serration to reach the critical strike cap. If you hit more crit rates in your tempers, then you don't need as many points into this, and if you needed more, you can put more points into this. I hit 2 and that got me off to the cap, but you really just want to put points into this until you get to 100% crit rate. After that, we're running 3 points into Rapid Ossification. This is going to be mandatory in the build because it's going to help us get our Bone Spirit down in cooldown, but it's also going to help us recover in our Bone Spirit, which is something I'm going to bring up in the mechanics section, so make sure you watch for that. After that, we're running 1 point into Reaper's Pursuit, 3 points into Gloom, and 3 points into Terror because they're big damage modifiers, which, speaking of damage modifier, Finality, Standalone, and Memento Mori. Following that, we have Inspiring Leader, which is going to help us cap our crit rate even more for our Bone Spirits, and we're maxing out Soul Rift. And lastly, for our key passes, we're taking Affliction. Affliction is not going to be doing damage in our build, but it does provide a 15% damage modifier, so it's going to be the best thing that we can take. So now we're at the all-important mechanics breakdown. In this section, I will break down exactly the mechanics that we're using to stack these really efficiently, but also how we're going to set up the snapshots. So the first mechanic that I want to break down is this Yul-Zon interaction. So Zon is giving us the guaranteed critical strike and overpower, and it's the one that we care most about stacking. And the way that we're stacking that is Yul, which is going to give us offering every single time we cast a ability with a cooldown. So naturally you'd think, oh, Bone Spirit, because we're, able to rapid fire it, right? But there's actually a mechanic that I like to call empty tendrils. So corpse tendrils, when you cast it and there's no corpse around, it doesn't go on cooldown. But you'll notice your Yul still picks it up for offering. So you can spam where there is no corpse and you'll be able to stack your Yul. So the reason why this is so strong is not just because it's faster to stack it like this, but because when you're stacking it with Bone Spirit, sometimes you can overstack it and you'll end up overpowering your Bone Spirit by mistake and you won't be able to snapshot with your Soul Rift. But because we're casting Tendrils out where there's like no corpses, there's no chance of it accidentally taking the overpower. So using empty Tendrils efficiently through a dungeon increases the consistency of the build by an astronomical degree, and it's something that you'll see me use in my gameplay all of the time. Now, a concern you might have is, well, if we're proccing quacks with health potions, aren't we going to run out of health potions eventually? And that is where our good friend Subo comes in. So Subo has an effect where every time that he drops a Molotov cocktail, there's a 50% chance that he drops a health potion alongside it. You can see right there. And these health potions are what's going to help us keep us topped off through an entire dungeon, where we get to press these health potions to get our damage modifiers off, and then Subo's going to help resupply them. So not only is he giving us broken map hacks, he's also going to help us supply our damage modifier through health potions and be able to keep that up through an entire dungeon. Subo is key to making this entire build work the way it is, and he is broken. So make sure that you're making full use of this health potion tech. So now that we learned the most efficient way to stack these passives, the next question is, well, how do we snapshot? And it's not as simple as you'd think. So if you just press Soul Rift like this, none of my buffs are consumed, so they're not snapshot. And if I press something like Blight, that Blight overpowered and it took all of my buffs. And you can see my Unmaker isn't overpowering. So just pressing Soul Rift with your buffs up is only step 1 of how to be able to snapshot. So thankfully, the next step in getting it to overpower is actually very easy. You just press your Soul Rift while you have all your buffs active, and then you press Bone Spirit, and that's it. The reason why this works is because you need Unmaker's damage to be the next thing that hits the enemy. And because we're running Macabre Grant's Essence on our Tempers, this happens before anything else, which makes sure that our Unmaker is the first thing that happens. So you press Soul Rift, and then you press Bone Spirit, and you can see all of my Unmakers are snapshotting. It's that easy. So there's a mechanic that I refer to as Sor Chaining, where you can see my Sor Rift is about to come off of cooldown and my Yul is about to be stacked. So rather than just keep going until my Sor Rift is out of cooldown, I can use the empty tendrils tech to finish off what's there, pop 2 health potions to get this, and then I just chain my Sor Rifts together and now I'm snapshotting the second one, right? Because otherwise what I'd have to do is say my Sor Rift ended here and my Yul just finished. I would have to go out of combat, empty tendril stack, and all of this time, I wouldn't be doing anything in combat. Whereas if I get it to 90% and then just spam 2 or 3 empty tendrils off to the side when my Sor Rift is off cooldown from the Decrepify, I could just chain them together and I wouldn't have downtime in my damage. So Sor Rift chaining is actually the reason why I don't like Great Feast in the build. And this is because the essence drain from Great Feast on top of your active Sor Rift giving you essence, this back and forth that you do between the drain and the essence generation can actually proc your Unmaker. And this proc that you get from Unmaker can steal your Zon, it can steal your Quack, and it can steal your untimely death triggers. And this becomes especially important inside dungeons where, say you're at 80% and you're just, off doing this and you've already popped your health potion, you've got, from Blood Orbs, you've already stacked your untimely death, and you're just waiting on like this little few empty tendrils. Well, if that drain causes you to regenerate and that regeneration causes you to have an Unmaker proc, you can end up losing your Quacks and you can end up losing your untimely death while you're trying to sit there and empty tendrils. So while Great Feast is more damage than Conceded, the inconsistency in being able to Sor Rift chain is why I don't like it in the build. And there are also some other things in this build that you really have to be careful with. So one of the things that we actually need to be careful with too is our untimely death triggers. So these stacks can actually get triggered by your affliction. So when you have your untimely death triggered, be careful about what you curse, because sometimes when you go curse something and it crits, you lose all your untimely death stacks. So you want to make sure that when you have all of your buffs ready to be snapshot, you're not going around cursing things because you're accidentally going to proc your untimely death stacks. Alongside that, even though it doesn't proc your rune words, what does proc your rune words is actually corpse tendrils. So when you have all of your stuff set up, you want to make sure that you're not pressing corpse tendrils, or you're not stacking after you've pressed corpse tendrils and it's like still going off, and you want to make sure that you're not pressing decrepify on anything while you have your stacks. The only thing that should happen when you have all 3 of your buffs up is you're pressing Soul Rift, and then you're pressing Bone Spirit. That's it. So this last mechanic that I want to go over will help you a lot when you're playing this build, and that's called the Rapid Ossification Bug. So if I ever miss my Bone Spirit and it goes on cooldown, I can use Decrepify to instantly get its cooldown back. The reason why this works is because there's a really weird interaction between Bone Spirit and Rapid Ossification, where Bone Spirit will only trigger Rapid Ossification for the first 100 essence spent, but every essence that you spend over 100 just doesn't go away. It's actually stored up, and you can access those stored up Rapid Ossification procs by spending essence, which is what we're doing with Decrepify. If you wanted, you can also spend these with Blight, as you can see here. As long as you're spending essence, you will get your Rapid Ossification back. So if you ever find yourself where it's on cooldown, make sure you're using this mechanic instead of waiting the 7 seconds. In closing, I would like to mention we also have a Goblin-Inc Discord in the description where I'll help answer any and all questions about the build, so make sure you drop by. And also, I would love to say I got to this point with the build all by myself, but there were 3 people in particular who really helped me get this build to the point where it is today. Sor was the earliest adopter of the entire Overpower Unmaker build back in the PTR, and he's really the one who showed me how much potential this build had back then. Arius found out that Quacks was snapshotting, and Rise was also an early adopter of the Overpower build on the PTR, and he's someone that I've bounced ideas off of constantly this week when I've been working on the build and pushed it to where it is. Without them, I couldn't have pushed this build as far as I have, so I wanted to give them a special shout out. This has been Sir K, and I hope you guys enjoyed the guide.